Hi there guys, I've got a video here for you today on the Leshiy 2. So in this one what we're going to be doing is doing a full disassemble of the Leshiy 2. Sorry this has taken so long, we've had the Leshiy 2 on the channel for the longest amount of time now and we still haven't taken it apart fully. To begin with I was just waiting for the patent to be released so I could have a read up on how the valve works, and then we got caught up in the Aquila, so it's sort of taken a little bit of a back seat now. But we've got the Aquila near where it needs to be now so we can focus back on the Leshiy 2. So there's a couple of things I want to make for it, and I'm going to need to take some measurements, so what I thought I'd do is I'd bring you along and we'll do a full disassembly. Right then, let's get started. I've already degassed the rifle, but if you need to degas the rifle, it's just that little screw there, and it's a 2mm Allen key. Just undo that slightly and it will start hissing out air, and that'll drain the whole system. There is another bleed screw under here, but I'll show you that in a minute. So we're going to separate the two halves first. That's just this little button here. So we'll put the back section to one side for a second and we'll concentrate on the forward section first. So my one's a little different from the standard Leshiy 2. I've replaced the original moderator, this one here, with the Valkyrie kit. I think it just looks better in my opinion, and the shroud I made for it along with a moderator is quieter than the standard Leshiy 2 mod. A little longer, but that doesn't really bother me that much. So first of all we'll take the Valkyrie kit off, and that's just with a 3mm Allen key and these 4 screws here. And next I'll just take off the shroud. Moderator and shroud normally come off as one piece. So there's the shroud. It's not one of the Valkyrie ones, it's one I made myself, so I won't bother taking it apart for the camera. And the Valkyrie kit can just slide off and we're presented with the barrel. Now my one is a 350mm long barrel and it's a 177. Normally the barrels come with an M14 thread on the end, but I didn't really like that so I changed it to a 1/2 inch UNF. So mine probably looks a little different from yours. Next we'll take the barrel out, and that's just these 4 screws here. 3mm Allen key. Make sure they're nice and loose. And then whilst pulling down the little indexing arm here, we can feed our barrel out. Now there is a little split in this C-ring here, and that needs to align with the roller. But once that's out, you just push the barrel out the back. Like so. And here's our barrel. Next we'll take off the little Valkyrie kit adapter, and that's just with a 4mm Allen key in these 2 screws here. And pull that off. And if you're using the standard moderator, that's where the 2 screws are located, and you take these off with just a 4mm Allen key. You can, if you want to, disassemble the moderator for cleaning and such. It's just held on with an O-ring. It can be a little tight. I've already had mine off 1 or 2 times, but that's what's inside a standard Leshiy 2 moderator. So a few baffle sections, and the barrel obviously feeds the pellet in from this side. Next we'll take the grip off, and in my case this is a custom Warren Snaith grip, so I'm using a 4mm Allen key. And this hole down here, we take that off like that. When you take the grip off, just make sure you don't lose this little steel part here. And that's just what the screw goes into. The bottom of the Leshiy 2 is a polymer frame, so it uses that little steel insert for the threads. Next we'll detach the polymer frame, and that's just with these 2 screws here and with a 3mm Allen key. They are quite tight, so I like to undo them with a L wrench and then switch back to my screwdrivers. 2 different size screws in this. The short one goes to the front and the longer one goes to the back. And then before we can take the polymer bottom off, we just need to redo up these screws here. That just allows the polymer frame to slide over them. Don't need to do them up tight, just so they touch. And then the frame can be pulled off. This is our trigger down here. No sears or anything like that. It's just a movement trigger. As this goes back, it pushes on a little push pin, and then that sets off a chain reaction which fires the gun but I'll explain a little about that when we get to the valve. If you wanted to take the trigger pins out for any reason, it's quite easy. All you need something hooked. Simply hook it behind the pin that you want to pull out, so this back one first, and then just pull it nice and carefully. The back one does house a spring, so just be careful as you pull it off. So there's the rear pin. For the middle pin, all you need to do is gently lift up on the trigger sir, and that pulls out the whole trigger assembly like that. And then this last one is the safety. So we need to take out the safety bar first. That's just with a 3mm Allen key. Then each side comes apart. And then to get the final one out, it's easier to put the whole assembly on a flat table and then just push on the safety bar on the bottom. It does have a spring and a ball behind it, so just be careful. A nice firm push and it should come out. So pins in the top there, and this spring ball is in the bottom there. Right then, and that's the first part fully disassembled. Right then, we can bring back the block and do a little more disassembling. I'm going to leave all the screws and the nuts all left in there. I'm also not going to bother punching out the pins. I can't see any reason why you'd need to punch them out. But if you did ever need to get them out for some reason, they're just pinned in there, so just get a punch on them, knock them through. But I'm going to be leaving them where they are. So we'll concentrate on the back. And first thing we're going to do is take this plate off. So again, L-wrench, and we're going to be undoing these 3 bolts. That's just with a 3mm Allen key. Once all the bolts are out, they are all the same length, we can just wiggle the back piece off. It does come off pretty freely, however it's fairly tight on there. So we'll stick the block to the side for a second and concentrate on this back piece here. So first thing we can do is remove this pin, and we can just push that out the top. Next we'll take this little arm off, and this little arm is held on by a C-clip. So we need to get that off. The easiest way I've found to get these off is just get them started with a Stanley knife. This is nice and thin and just works really quite well for pushing these little C-clips off. So we get them started, then with a nice sharp pointy thing, just hook them off. Now, these are quite small and they do tend to go flying, so it might be worth just getting a few of these, sticking them in a bag just in case you lose any. And then we need to do the same on the underside here. So just get it started with the back of the blade, then hook it off. So when both C-clips are off, we can lightly compress the spring, and whilst pulling the arm and this steel piece down here, pull the whole assembly off. It is sprung loaded obviously, so just be careful. And there are the pieces there. So we'll stick them to one side for a minute. And the last thing that we're going to take out on the back plate here is the little magazine tension spring that's in the end here. This just puts a little piece of tension on the magazine shaft, but just with a 2mm Allen key, undo the grub screw on the side and on the top. On my rifle the grub screws were the same. Then tip out the little spring and the little ball. Next what we're going to do is punch out this little pin here in order to get the little Delrin roller out. Now I just made myself up a little punch here, that just goes in there and then I can knock it through. I found commercially available punches wasn't small enough to get in the hole, so I just made this little thing up here. So I'll just knock that out quickly off camera. And there we go, nice and easy. If you wanted to get this out and you didn't have the ability to make a custom punch, you could probably use a drill bit. It really wasn't that tight in the hole, so probably find yourself a 1.5mm drill bit, cut the drill bit end off and just use the shaft as a nice little punch. But anyway, I'll stick this to one side. And then last but not least is the little latching arm here. And this has 2 jobs. Number 1 it indexes the pins so that you can open and close the rifle, and number 2, this part here acts like a lock when you fold the rifle over. You can just undo that. Once the screw's off, we can just pull the arm off. Be very careful, it has got quite a large spring behind it, so just be mindful of that as you take the screw off. That part there. Then there's the spring carrier there. So then that's all the little pieces to that assembly. And then that's as far as I'm going to take the block. There is a little Delrin spacer on there which I'll pull off, and that was in that recess there. You could, if we wanted to, knock these 2 pins out, these 2 here, but I don't see a reason to. But then that's the bare Leshiy 2 block. Right then, now we can move on to the butt of the rifle. Now this is where the magic happens. This houses the valve and also the air cylinder. Now mine looks a little different from yours. Mine's got a digital regulator gauge on the side here. This isn't a Reaper one, it's not an externally adjustable reg. I did make this quite some time ago now, just because I didn't want to faff around with the regulator tester. And it's also fitted with the black bits that I sell on my little eBay store, so the black button, the black butt pieces, and then I just painted the fill cover there black, so there's no more red line around it. I just think it looks better all black, but that's just personal preference. I've also put a little bit of paracord around it. I stole that idea from Airgun Leshiy, and it works quite nice actually. The neoprene cover got all rucked up when I fitted the gauge on there, and instead of cutting it down I just wrapped it in paracord. Found a pattern I liked on YouTube and just followed the tutorials. Nothing really that fancy, but works quite nicely. Right then, let's get started disassembling this. First we're going to take this little brace off, and that's just with a 4mm Allen key. And this reveals our secondary bleed. This little screw in here is a secondary bleed for the air tank. So if you ever lock your regulator closed, you can undo this and still bleed the pressure through. Obviously most people swap these for the bottles, but I've left mine as the original cylinder, so I've still got that option. Next I'm just going to take my regulator gauge off, then I can unscrew the valve, this end piece here. I'll stick this to one side as we'll be covering this as a whole in a minute. Next we'll unscrew the regulator portion of the air cylinder. So there's the regulator section. It does have my plenum plug in it. I don't really like this idea. I'm going to try and change this for something else. Now that I understand how the valve works, a plug in the plenum's quite a crude way of limiting the power. So I'm going to try and come up with something a little different and hopefully a little better. But this is the one I made. As you can see there, it's got a wall halfway down, and that's what the gauge screws to. So down there. And the regulator's obviously in the back here. So to get the reg out, all we need to do is take some spring pliers and then remove the little clip. Once the clip's out, we can pull the regulator out. They are normally quite tight, but there we go, there's the regulator. And then I'm just going to pull my paracord wrap off, try and keep it in one piece. Right, next we're going to take this rear air cylinder off. To do that we need to get in here with a 4mm Allen key, just located on the screw, and then undo it. It can be quite tight, so just be careful. And then once the screw's undone, we can just wiggle the back section and pull the air tube off from the butt. There is another bleed screw there, and that would be done with a 2mm Allen key, but we'll set this to one side. Next we'll take the gauge out, and for that we need our circlip pliers. And we'll just pull that circlip off, put that to one side, and the gauge can be pushed out like so. There it is there. And then to remove the gauge from this little body here, you just need an adjustable spanner across these flats and another one across the gauge. As I said before, I prefer adjustables on gauges as the gauge size is often not close to a spanner size. And there we have it there. There is an O-ring in the bottom there. There's the gauge and the little adapter for the end of the gun. I did used to have the digital one on the back, but for the air pressure you don't need an exact amount of air that's in there. So I just swapped it over to the analog one. And then next we'll take off the bottom air cylinder. So first we'll rotate the fill cover and stick in our fill adapter. Then we can just unscrew it. If you don't put the little fill adapter in, what will happen is it will just spin in the rifle. And there we have it. There's our bottom air tube. And then when we take this out, take this little O-ring off here, we can then push this assembly out as one piece, like that. And then on this section there's a few things we can take off. Firstly, it's the one-way valve here. A rather clever one-way valve in that it's just a screw with a little bit of the threads ground away and an O-ring. Quite a clever way to make a very simple one-way valve. And the last thing we could take off is this little end cap here. Now I had to make a little specialist tool for this, as none of my flat-bladed screwdrivers could get the C-clip started. So what it is, just a little piece of stainless steel that pushes on that C-clip. Just gets it started enough so that we can come along with our little pointy thing and hook it out of the seat. Like that. Then once the C-clip's off, the end just pulls off. You've got to be quite careful with this, as there is a little spring and a ball behind there. What I like to do is just let it ping down on the desk, and then we can just pull the spring out. There we have it. That's that assembly fully disassembled. We could, if we wanted to, just take the two butt pieces out. I'm going to leave them in. But if you wanted to get them out, what I found works best is just with a punch in the top one. Get it in the hole and then just lever it out. Obviously minding the side of the punch on the block there. But as long as you just get it sort of at this angle, it's normally pretty alright. Pull it out, put the new ones in, or remove the screw, and the bottom one is easiest to push out from this side. Just go in there with a punch, push them out. They are a bit stiff normally, but they do come out. If you are interested, I do have a video of fitting these black parts on the channel already. When you unscrew your air cylinder from the adapter here, it may take the end out with it. That's quite normal, and all you have to do is unscrew the end from this piece if it comes off like that. If you want to get this piece out, what you need to do is use a couple of pins in these holes and undo it. But I'm going to leave mine as it is, as there's only an O-ring in there and we don't really need to take it apart. So I'll stick this to one side and we'll get the valve out. Right then, now we can move on to the valve. So the valve's quite a complicated little piece of kit, but I'll show you how it comes apart. So first thing we're going to do is remove the little black button. That's with a 2.5mm Allen key in the little screw hole at the top there. Here's the button out, and then we can remove the locking pin. It has got a little spring on the end, so just be careful of that. Once that's off, we'll take the magazine indexer out, and that's just a 3mm Allen key in this screw here. Just remove the cover there. That piece comes out as a one part. It's just a shaft with a spring on it. And then to remove this top piece here, all we need to do is push down on it a little, and then using a 2mm punch, just push this pin out here and this one out here. Once they're both out, we can lift the top off, the spring and the indexing system itself. We can also remove this little steel part in here. Found you can normally bang it out. It does have an O-ring on the end. Whilst we're here, we'll take the transfer port out. My one's a PTFE one, your one's probably just a red one. There's the PTFE part. and then we can see the brass valve in there. We will be getting that out in a minute. So first of all, what we're going to do is undo the back of the valve like so, keeping the valve nice and upright. Then once it's undone all the way, tipping it over and pulling this part out all as one piece. And then there's the underside of the brass shell. At this stage we can tip this little pin out in here, and that's just this piece here. So give it a nudge and it should fall through the valve. Here it is there. Little ball on the end with a spring behind it. Looking at it, my ball has split, so I'll need to replace that, but that shouldn't be too hard to make. I'll put this to one side, and then next what we'll do is we'll take apart this piece. So there is a spring and a ball behind here, so nice and careful. Wiggle the little plastic piece out from the aluminium seat, like so, and there we see the little ball on the end there. Now this is the valve itself, or the valve seal, and this seals on the brass shell that's still inside the rifle, but it does have a push pin that's still in the hole there, so we'll tip that out, and there it is there. I'll explain a little about how the valve works in a minute, and then with some tweezers we'll just take this little ball bearing off the top there so it doesn't get lost. It's a very, very small ceramic ball bearing. Nice and careful with it, and we'll also take out the seat and the spring while we're here. So there's a little ball bearing seat, and then finally we'll remove the spring. These can be a little stiff in there, so just be careful as you pull it out. Right, I have got a little spacer, this black part in here, but I'll just pull that out. Give it a few taps, and then we can pull it out like that. So that just went in the top hole, although this is a custom part. This is a part that I made to fit in there. But first we'll undo the two jets, and that's just with a 5mm socket. Crack them both loose, and then we can just unscrew them. These are custom ones I made, and they're both 1.4mm jet sizes. I think Airgun only does up to 1.3. Then we can just push out the little spring jets as well. So that's that part fully disassembled. Bring back the valve. Next up we'll take the brass shell out. Now these can be quite stiff, so I've found normally if you just keep working round, just pulling down and up, normally you can get them out. If they do get a little stuck, what I've found you can do is just get yourself a nice soft piece of plastic and just give the valve a little tap. There it comes out. So this is the inside of the valve, and this part here seals on that little plastic piece we took out, but I'll show you more of that in a minute. Now we can take the rest of the valve apart. So first of all, we'll just take this cover piece off here. That's just a little cap, then the springs underneath it, and there we have this piece here. This is the part the push rod goes through and the little round Delrin ball semi-seals on. Then if we come in from this side, we can just push the whole housing out nice and easy. Here that comes there. And then that's the valve body pretty much all disassembled. There are a couple more things we could take off. This screw here, I'm pretty sure this is just a blanking screw. But we'll just take that off with a 5mm Allen key. And we see in there, and there's the screw. I'm just going to put it back, as I'm pretty sure that's just a blanking screw. Next we could knock the pins out if we wanted to. I have already taken this one out on another video, so I won't do it on this one. And this is the locking pin, so as you fold the rifle together, this is the pin that locks. It's slightly different on the Valkyrie kit, as it's a little longer and allows the rifle to latch easier. So the last thing we could take off if we wanted to is this plate here. Now this is the locking plate, so as the rifle gets closed, a pin rides up here, this little slope, and drops into this little hole. That locks it in place so that as the rifle fires, the rifle doesn't automatically open up. I remade mine. This is stainless steel, as the original was some kind of chromed or plated metal, and the plating was flaking off pretty sharpish. So I just remade it in stainless. But it's super tight in there and I really don't feel like getting it out. So I'm going to leave it in. Although if you did want to get it out, take this screw out here and then bang this pin out. If I remember rightly, I banged the pin this way to get it out and then this way to get it in. But there we have it. Pretty much fully disassembled. We could also take the trigger stop out, but my one is really nicely adjusted at the moment, so I'm going to leave it where it is. I'll explain a little more how that works when we get to the rebuild section. Right then, and finally I just thought we'd have a little chat about the valve. So if you want to read the pattern information, I'll link the pattern information down below. But anyway, I've just loosely assembled it outside the rifle so we can see what's happening, just with all the important parts. So in the rifle it's assembled like this. Valve's nice and tight. So inside this brass valve core is the little plastic piece that looks like a funnel, and that's sealed on the inside of that valve core. So when we pull the trigger, it pushes on this pin here. This pin pushes on the pin in the middle here, and in turn presses on a little ball bearing that we took out earlier that's inside the plastic part of the valve. That ball bearing deseats and allows pressure to rush out from this hole here. What happens then is the plastic part of the valve is able to deseat from the brass part of the valve, and air is able to flow through these holes here. These cutouts that are connected to the back of this aluminium part, through these cutouts and through the holes here, through the brass part and around these holes here. When that happens, it does two things. One, it sends air to the magazine indexing system, and secondly, and most importantly, we get the puff of air that comes out of the transfer port. So we'll just quickly disassemble this. I'll give you a closer look at everything. There we have it in there. This ball bearing seals on that hole there, and when we push the push rod, it deseats this ball bearing from this circle here, allowing the air that's in this chamber to rush out of the end there. This in turn causes this valve seat to retract and allow air to pass over this part and through the brass shell. So air travels from these holes here, round the outside of this plastic part here, through them holes down in the bottom, not the central one, the ones on the outside. So in the valve you have two main bodies of pressure, the one in here and the one on the outside of the valve. These jets at the end here control the flow and rate in which air enters the back of the valve and forces it closed. That's why having larger jet sizes decreases your power, as the valve is able to close faster, and having smaller ones allows the valve to stay open for longer, therefore giving you more power. So really quite an interesting and unique design. There are some nuances to that, and I'm still working out exactly what changes what. For example, putting this little spacer here in one of these holes increases the power. I think that's because if we take up volume in this chamber here, what it does is when we pull the trigger and fire the rifle, the valve back sees a greater pressure drop, so the valve opens for longer, or closes more slowly, one of the two. But there are some more experiments to do with the valve, and it's something I'm quite looking forward to playing with. I've got a little idea that I'm playing with, and I'm just trying to make work at the moment, in which the two bodies of air, so the one in the valve and the one around the valve, are actually different pressures. That would involve having two regulators set at two different pressures, so it changes the speed in which the valve can close. I don't know if it will work, but it's something I want to try, but that's still a little way off. Oh, and while I remember it, just one thing I forgot to take off while we was in this part of the valve body is there's a little Delrin spacer at the bottom of the magazine indexing hole. So you just need to tip that out. It can get a little stuck in there, So all I had to do was poke it with a cocktail stick, and that loosened it enough so it fell out when I tapped it out. But I just thought I'd mention that now. Apart from that, I'm really pleased with the Leshiy 2. I think it's a really well made rifle, and I'm really happy to see all the little pieces and all the little parts of engineering that make it perform the way it does. So the reassembly will be coming a little later. I need to design some things and make some things. So the reassembly won't be for a little while. But with that being said, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.